do that one more time. Welcome, Dracuphiles, to Sundays with Dracula. Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will. This is chapter 20 of Sundays with Dracula. I am Edward G. Pettit of The Rosenbach in Philadelphia, the home of Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula. Over 100 pages of outlines, early plot ideas, and research notes compiled by the author over the 7 years he developed and wrote the book. It is an extraordinary record of the conception and development of a novel. We will see something of Stoker's notes a little later in the show today. But joining me as co-hosts are the Ghoul Guides, Mary Going and Dr. Lauren Nixon. How are you?
I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm well, thank you.
I'm sorry you're under the weather, and you have a nice new hairstyle for us, too. So
yeah, I'm trying to keep it, keep it varied.
Well, I'll talk to you guys in just a minute about what you've been up to lately. It is great to see you both, and I can't wait to talk to you about this chapter with you, because that is what we do here on Sundays with Dracula. We illuminate, unravel, disentangle Bram Stoker's novel about bloodsuckers in the 1890s, one chapter at a time for 27 weeks. This is week 20. Oh my gosh, it's going so quickly. In my head, it's going quickly now. Co-hosts join me each week to create a kind of conversational annotation of the entire novel. And Bram Stoker's notes, of course, are just one of the many gems at the Rosenbach's, in the Rosenbach's collections. You can go online, you can see some of our collections guides, as well as gallery gateways of past exhibitions. It's rosenbach.org, and other virtual programs and courses we're creating. We have two new courses right now that are up. A course on Chaucer called Poetry and Pandemic, and they're going to start with reading a little Boccaccio Decameron and then Chaucer in Middle English. So it'll be quite enjoyable class to do the Middle English and Chaucer. That starts in just a few weeks. It's already half full, or a little more than half full. And there's also a course called On Stage Plays, from great plays from the stage to film, in which it's a 4 great plays and 4 great films made from them. You can find them all on our website. There's also a support tab there on our website. You click on the support tab, go down, ways to donate. Any amount helps. And I made my drink early today. Before we start talking about what you guys have been doing, I did a drink tutorial before the show even started at 20 minutes, 15 minutes to the hour. And I think from now on I'm going to do that every week, 20 minutes to the hour. I'm going to come on and spend about 10 minutes, making the cocktail and describing it. And I especially was doing this because I had an effect that I wanted to do and it didn't work out. And that was, I had my skull ice cubes. I wanted to make red and drop them in, and they would kind of, like, you could see the little dissolve right away. But the things I was trying for the skull, they weren't, I tried grenadine syrup, and the syrup was too thick and it didn't freeze right. It didn't freeze at all. And then I tried red food dye, and it was so, my fingers are still a little bit red trying to get them out of the thing. And it was going to be too much. It's like the whole drink would have gone red fast, and I would have been like red on my beard and everything, and it wouldn't have worked. So I need to find a substitute. Somebody mentioned maybe raspberries, or doing a raspberry puree with water or something like that. So, but the drink is, and it's also special because I've even got, it's a champagne cocktail is what it is. I've even got my champagne here in it. Where I got some Moutard champagne, and it's champagne and gin and a little Galliano, a little aperitif Galliano yellow, which I really like. Just a tiny bit on the top, mix it in. And simple syrup. So simple syrup and gin together. Then I add the champagne, then a little Galliano on top, then skull ice cubes if you have them. I have regular skull ice cubes today. They're not fancy red skull ice cubes. And then I put some cherries in it. That's what the red is down there. Some of that thick Luxardo cherry, maraschino cherry syrup, and some cherries. But I was really hoping for a cool effect with the red skulls floating right here and talk about it. And of course, it is called the Count Deville, because that is the funniest line in the book when you come across the Count Deville, which we'll talk about later. So the Count Deville, I thought he would have a very special champagne drink. So that's what we have today, a champagne cocktail, the Count Deville. So, and I had tea to join you guys. And I even have hot tea in my mug here, my Twinings Irish breakfast, because it has gotten cool enough to actually have hot. I drink tea. It's funny, we talk about tea, this guys, and all the drinking I do. I actually drink tea 24/7. I always have iced tea for about 6 months straight, and then I have hot tea for 6. Like, I always have a cup of tea going, but it's hot now because it's gotten cool, so I can definitely mix with you guys more because I'm have my tea ready to go too. What's new with you? I'm loving the new shows.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a learning curve. We're getting our heads around things like editing, but no, it's
I ignore that. I ignore editing for this show. I just run it.
Yeah.
If anything goes wrong, it's just a ghost that does it.
Yeah, we've decided Mary's laptop's haunted because it keeps pulling tricks on us.
Well, tea, as I learned on the Ghoul Guide show, tea is Gothic. Tea is a Gothic drink.
Tea is incredibly Gothic, yeah. I wanted to do that one as one of our first episodes because, Mary in particular is well known as a tea drinker, and it's just one of those things that I think, appeals to a large audience, and it does have a fascinating history, and I think we don't think about why it's such a, particularly for us in the UK, I don't think we think about why it's such a big part of our culture. So I thought that would be a fun little investigation. But yeah, we've got some ideas for stuff coming up. Mary's Essex episode has inspired me to think about what elements of Nottingham might be Gothic.
And I want to ask, and we're going to talk, Mary, I'm going to hit you up with that today because talking about Carfax and the houses are going to. Because,
great. Yeah. I, as Laura knows, I love talking about Essex. I know lots about Essex, and I love the fact that Dracula comes to Essex, so it's perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely hit you up about that today. And then there's a new episode on, but is it Gothic? Disney Princesses.
Disney Princesses.
I haven't watched it yet, and I'm looking forward to watching that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was finally an opportunity for me to speak about one of my pet conspiracy theories. Because, spoiler for the episode, or teaser for the episode, there's a scene in Sleeping Beauty that is almost identical to a scene in Radcliffe's Romance of the Forest. And, Disney Princesses are one of those properties that draws a lot on things like fairy tales and folklore, and and things like Sleeping Beauty. You've got a huge dragon that spews green fire. So what's more Gothic than that?
Cool. Yeah. All righty. Well, I love it. So I can't wait to listen to that one too. And you've also done a couple Gothic novels that you've talked about as well, right? Or at least one. I can't remember if it was more than one.
Yeah, think have we done 2 of those? We did Melmoth and Claremont.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melmoth went way too long because it's like a stupidly.
There is that.
600 page 4-volume novel. Yeah.
Maybe I'll do Melmoth next for Sundays with Melmoth, and it will last for
here for about
300 weeks.
Yes, but also, dear God, no.
I could do Varney the Vampire. I'd do like one installment per week. Man, that would take us like 3 years. So. All righty. Before we get to the chapter, we have a special guest coming up just next week. Kim Newman is going to be on the show, the author of, that's not it, this is a newer edition of Anno Dracula. He will be on the show next week for chapter 21 of Dracula, which is the chapter of Dracula where his action, like what happens in Anno Dracula, everything is different, and that's from that point on. So he'll be on next week. And on Saturday, we have a very special Q&A program coming up this Saturday at 3 p.m. with Mark Gatiss. He's going to come on with me on Saturday afternoon here, evening for you guys in the UK, and it'll be evening for Mark, and talk about all things Dracula, something that has inspired him since he has been a child. And he finally got to do a full adaptation for the BBC. So we're going to talk about that. I'll mention all the stuff at the mid break too. On tomorrow evening's Drac Chat, on Monday Drac Chat, my Dracuphile guest will be part of the Ozarks branch of the Dracula Club, Holly Graves. Holly's in the audience right now. She was the first one on today as I started making my drink and talking about it. It was just Holly and I talking about a drink. And she will be on tomorrow night on Monday, Drac Chat. All right, let's talk about chapter 20. You guys ready? I will try to get you through quick today, Lauren, if you're not feeling that way. So,
Thank you.
but I can't guarantee it. The show with the two of you, every show averages a little longer. And of course, it's, there's one more person to talk. But...
yeah, I've dosed myself up on cold and flu. So hopefully I'll be okay for a couple of hours.
All righty. And if you got to drop out, you'll drop out. Mary will take over. So,
yeah.
But when last we met in chapter 19, last week, Mina had been recounting her nights after the men sent her to bed. It's almost a line, too, like, and the men sent me to bed. And her first entry, her last entry was on October 2. So the end of the last chapter, we get October 2, an entry from her just before she goes to bed, and she's asked for a sleeping draft. And now chapter 20, we go back another day. A day earlier with Jonathan's account of what he discovered in his investigations of Dracula's whereabouts, or the whereabouts of his boxes of soil, really is what he's looking for. And these investigations have been kept secret from Mina. So we go from, 2 days of Mina, 2 entries from Mina, and then we have to go back and find out what happened on those days that they weren't sharing with her. So we'll go through those. And this is also now the same day that they've just come back from investigating Carfax. So they've been in Carfax. They found the boxes of earth, the rats, the dogs chased the rats. They've come home. They slept a couple hours in the morning. And now here we are. And the first is Jonathan, right? And it's Jonathan's journal, October 1 evening. So he's describing what happened during the day. Investigating Thomas Snelling, who was Thomas, and what he learns obviously is that laborers like to drink. That's like the big lesson that Jonathan learns investigating, that if you're a laborer and you have some kind of accent, you love to drink. So maybe I would have been a laborer, and maybe I was a laborer in my past life. Sorry, my screen just went a little crazy. There we go. So he wants to find Thomas Snelling, and Thomas Snelling is one of the two, along with Jack Smollett, who he'll also see, who were the carters who were taking the boxes from Carfax, and Renfield escaped and attacked them. So we're 1 October. I found Thomas Snelling in his house, but unhappily, he was not in a condition to remember anything. The very prospect of beer, which my expected coming had opened to him, had proved too much, and he had begun too early on his expected debauch. But his wife, this is interesting that he has to mention his wife, who seemed a decent, poor soul. Hinting, I guess, that Thomas is not a decent, soul, because he's, just completely drunk. But Stoker doesn't take any kind of, he's not taking any kind of like temperance stance, or he doesn't seem to be criticizing so much the poor who like to drink, or not. I don't know if you call them poor, because they're clearly working and they clearly support themselves. So the working class who like to drink. He doesn't seem to. It's a bit of fun for Stoker, it seems, in this. And then he finds. So he goes off to. But he finds out from the wife that he can talk to Smollett, who was the other guy, and he's at home in his shirt sleeves taking a late tea out of a saucer. And he seemed a decent, intelligent fellow, distinctly a good, reliable type of workman, and with a headpiece of his own. So I'm sorry, maybe I'm going to walk back from what I just said, because Smollett is not drinking, and he's drinking tea, and he's decent and reliable, right? There's a lot of class stuff going on here. Is this right, Mary, Lauren?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah. This is an interest. If you kind of think about dating Dracula, Vinter Stickler's kind of outside of my wheelhouse when it comes to class. Mary's a little bit more well versed on late Victorian than me, but you know, we've talked about this earlier on with that kind of anxiety about middle classes and upper classes, and the kind of the relationship or differences between characters like Arthur and Jonathan. But this kind of like representation of the working classes is something that I kind of always feel like Stoker can't quite make his mind up. And you do get a lot at this point, this kind of obviously there's increasing sort of socialist commentary about things like, well, the working class are working class because they're not being given the right type of opportunities. You know, you're increasingly getting free schooling. We're building up towards things like the NHS. But there's still this kind of like, well, perhaps it's bred in, perhaps it's almost a race thing. And yeah, you do get kind of things like drinking and things like gambling always kind of crop up as these weird sort of working class.
It's certainly almost a kind of ethnographic description, you know, like their clothes, their habits, like even his shirt. He's in his shirt sleeves.
Yeah.
That he mentions, and well, no, I was going to say, and we talked about tea last time. No, I mean, on your thing talking about tea, but it's a Gothic show. I just remember because I watched it, you know, a few days ago. You talked about the whole ritual of tea, and he's taking his tea out of a saucer. Now, is that a signifier too, that he's not quite of a proper class doing it the right way?
Yes. I think I mentioned this a little bit in the tea episode. So there's a lot of class anxiety around tea because of China. So you are supposed to drink tea from China. So things like drinking tea from mugs in the 20th century becomes a real kind of sign of like class or class anxiety. But
really?
particularly, yeah. So if you put hot tea in cheap china or fake china, it will crack. So the teacup is usually it's a lot more fragile than a saucer. I might be misremembering here, but I believe that for those that didn't want to put, or either wanted to drink their tea black or didn't want to put their milk in the cup before the tea, you usually would be stewing tea in a pot. So it's not like when you make tea in a mug and you put the milk in first and you get this awful unbrewed slosh. But drinking it out of a saucer, you're less likely to crack the cup. Because the saucer is gonna, if you think about a saucer compared to the very thin china of a cup, a saucer is a lot more robust and less likely to crack.
So are we imagining a cup in a saucer and it's overflowed and he's drinking it, or is it just the cup not even there?
I think you could read it both ways. I've always imagined it as the sauce, as drinking tea out of the saucer, and you do kind of have that, but that also happens, like that someone's overfilled and you sort of like drink it out of the saucer. But if you want to drink your tea, if you want to drink it black, if you want to drink it hot, if you don't want to drink it, if you don't want to go through that rigmarole, if you've got cheap china, then drinking out of the saucer is a much easier way to do it. But it would certainly signify a lower class, because the lack of time, the lack of restraint, the lack of quality of goods. There's even things like the tea that was sold to the working classes was usually, maybe not by this point, but traditionally the tea sold to the working classes was tea that had been dried and sold on by the upper classes. So tea was like secondhand because you could rebrew the same leaf multiple times and things like that. So you've got all this stuff about quality and about not only the quality of the tea, but the quality of the china. And certainly, even though he's drinking tea and he's not drinking beer, and again, the fact he's drinking beer is a class symbol. But yeah, very much this
He's
idea of someone with a tea.
He's the only sober working class person I think we encounter in this entire novel. So
yeah.
And then Jennifer, just in the questions here, has this. I didn't notice this. She says that he meant about this mysterious receptacle about the seed of it. He remembered. Mrs. Smollett remembered all about the incident of the boxes, and from a wonderful dog's-eared notebook, which he produced from some mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers. And I mean, Stoker's having fun with this a little bit, but is Jennifer's question is this a new development in a sense? Were back pockets in pants a new fashion at the time? I don't know that. Do you guys know about that?
Yeah, a little bit, because trousers are looser. So if you think about, so essentially in terms of pockets are invented in the 17th century, more or less. So traditionally you have a band and you tie the band around your waist or under your shirt, and that has two pouches on it, and they're your pockets. And then if you think about men's fashion, so if you think about the Georgian men's fashion, you have, you know, the very elaborate coats, it's very detailed. You would probably have some kind of pocket in the jacket. And then when we get into 18th century and we move towards that more tailored, think Jane Austen period drama, that fashion stays in fashion for about 100 years. You know, if you sort of look at something like Pride and Prejudice, and then you look at something like Downton Abbey, and the men's formal dress, it's almost exactly the same in shape. So men would wear very fitted trousers, high-waisted fitted trousers, shirt, jacket, usually quite well tailored. So you'd often have pockets in the jacket for things like notebooks or money, but having pockets in trousers, to have a pocket in a trouser, the trouser has to be quite loose. Whereas, you might have a servant, you know, you wouldn't need to carry money necessarily. So yeah, pockets, I would have to do some more research in terms of late 19th century and things like pockets. But it certainly kind of fits in with that idea of symbols of modernity, like Mina and Lucy in the Whitby scenes earlier on. This idea of someone having a pocket in their trousers. Trousers are supposed to be, you know, well fitted, and generally pockets would be in jackets or in overcoats. So if you think about those big, massive overcoats, you would usually have that would be where your pocket is. So
this is almost certainly a class signifier then, that the fact that
I would say so,
trouser pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine Jonathan would be wearing if you think about early versions of suits, but characters like, and Quincy may be different, but, you know, characters like Arthur definitely and Seward are probably going to be wearing more, you know, traditional, conventional male dress. So you probably do have a pocket, but it's probably not in your trousers. It's probably somewhere in your jacket or in your overcoat. And yeah, having trousers that are loose enough that you've got a pocket in there is probably more of a sign of utility, and utility usually equals lower class. So like women's dresses historically, more working women dresses would have pockets in them, but even, you know, noble women's dresses, their day dresses would have pockets in them, but their evening dresses wouldn't have pockets and things like that. So yeah, there's some really interesting, if you guys are interested in fashion history, there's some really good fashion historian and material historian stuff going on at the moment. Scholars like Karen Harvey do really interesting stuff about things like men's boots and what boots would symbolize and things like that. But it does cross over into my warehouse, particularly when we get soldiers popping up.
I love how this book takes me down all the, like, you know, so many directions, so many things to, you know, to explore with when you start talking about these little details in this, you know, this mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers, and right there you can do this whole investigation on, you know, fashion and working class, you know, dress as opposed to other dress that, you know, Jonathan may be wearing here. So, well, we get our first mention of locations here now, because now we find out that there are 6 boxes were taken, and Smollett took them from Carfax, and he left them at 197 Chicksand Street in Mile End, Newtown, and then another 6 were deposited at Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. Am I saying that right? How do we say that?
Mary?
I actually have never come across that before, other than in here. So Bermondsey?
Bermondsey. Okay, that's what I said. Without the accent, I said that. So.
We like to run all of our vowels and our letters together.
Yes.
So we like
as many syllables as you can cut out of a word, you will cut out. Elide. Almost every word's elided. Yeah, I've mentioned before, Chumundsley as Chumley is my favorite. So
Chumley.
Yeah.
Grosvenor, that's the other one that people get a lot.
So Bermondsey is the other, and then we'll hit some more locations in a bit, but I wanted to start talking to you guys about, well, maybe let's wait, because we're going to hit some more addresses, and then I want to really start hitting you about these locations, unless you have something to say about these locations in particular.
Just quickly now,
Yes.
Chicksend Street, Mile End Newtown, that's near Whitechapel, so you're like north of the Thames, near like Aldgate, Tower Hill, Fenchurch, that sort of area, and then Bermondsey would be like south of the Thames. So to get to that, you would have to cross the river to go across the bridge. But you're looking at like two distinct locations in London already.
Okay.
One that's definitely in the kind of East End, which obviously is it's notorious for being a working class area, but also an area for lots of immigrants, which I think is really significant. And then just south of the river as well. I think another working class area, but not the East End. So two different locations.
And so Jonathan is correct. I mean, Jonathan's correct when he talks about the Count spreading out. He's going like in northeast and then south, that he's really...
Yeah, and he's definitely picking, I think, if you look at London, even now, but certainly then, there's a definite picking on vulnerable places where, people are gonna perhaps not be noticed if they go missing. I can see people mentioning Jack the Ripper. Yes. These are areas notorious for, people coming and going without.
Well, we'll hit Piccadilly soon, so that's when I'm going to get into Piccadilly in a little bit, but not yet, not until we get a mention of it. But Smollett wants to send him to talk to another guy. I said Sam Blockton. This is my problem when I finish on. I was already on Friday, like I'd finished all my work, and then I was like, or Thursday, and then I spend 2 days away from it, and I have to like look at it like, wait, who's next? But Smollett tells him to go talk to another guy, right? And is it
Bloxham?
Sam Bloxham.
That might have been the drink today. I was going to have a drink called the Bloxham, but I had to go with Count Deville. Once you Count Deville, you're like, that's it. That's the point I'm going to hit. So I was also going to have a drink called the Deputy. So, but I decided that I would go with the Count Deville. But Sam is a rare one when he starts on the booze. So this is going to be tough for Jonathan to track him down. And he even gets off early. Like, never mind the booze the night before. So he's a good worker. He can still get loaded every night, and he's not going to miss his opening time to work. Jonathan is going to go out, but then first he starts talking about Mina. Like, he's written his entry about this is, what he's done today, and he's going to have to go look up Bloxham tomorrow. And then we get a little mention of Mina here, and it's Mina is fast asleep, and I don't think we need to, just because we're going to hit more, right? But also we have this dialect we get from Smollett as well, and that Stoker seems to love the fact that he gets to write in working class dialect. And we get 3 governors in this chapter, which I love. I don't know, maybe that's an Americanism. When you see governor, you think like, "Ooh, that's a real Britishism for us."
Well, I was gonna mention this because I don't know if Mary disagrees with me. I always find it really hysterical when people write in dialect when it's not their dialect, because you can always tell.
It's always like Dick Van Dyke doing
yeah, like you should be like,
that's not really the way it sounds.
Yeah. Like, the idea is supposed to be that if you read it you naturally sound like that accent, and I don't know about you, Marion, because you actually are from the South, but I struggle to read this, and I just, in my head, it sounds like different acting, like it sounds like a joke Cockney. Like it doesn't, when I read this, it doesn't sound like any accent I've ever heard anyone actually speak to me with.
Yeah, I struggle with reading other dialects, especially like Scottish dialect in Hogg's Confession of a Justified Sinner. This dialect I can read and it looks fine to me, but it is hilarious because it even when I read it, I can just imagine someone else like putting on that kind of fake Cockney accent. And Cockney is slightly different from my accent, which kind of oscillates between a generic Southern and estuary accent. So Cockney is slightly different, but
yeah, you sound nothing like Bert in Mary Poppins. So
thank you. I'll take that.
That's because he sounds nothing like anyone from London.
Well, I think Stoker's really drawing on a stage tradition here too. I imagine.
Yeah,
too. I think,
100%.
there is a kind of Cockney stage character by this point, certainly.
Yeah, like this kind of sounds like people putting on a production of Oliver Twist. Like that's what this sounds like, very, very much so.
And that you mentioned that there was a virtual conference just a couple of days ago on Dickens, the impact of Dickens from University of Buckingham, and somebody presented a paper on Dickens representing the Cockney accent and what has happened to that over time. And that if you go back when Dickens first does it, his very first serial novel, Pickwick Papers, and it's Sam Weller and his dad. And there are some features of that kind of brand them as, the V's or the W's as V's, and that brand them as this kind of working class speech and this, kind of Londoner working class speech. But then it doesn't have the features that later get associated with this kind of Cockney, Cockney in quotation marks accent. And but Dickens is so important in formulating this kind of idea of this different way of people speaking, and he's important just also because he's so popular in the 19th century. But I imagine it almost has to be the stage tradition that takes this over and generates this,
It becomes a really popular trope as well when you think about things like Secret Garden, which does the Yorkshire dialects. It does become a really popular writing technique to try and place, and I'm tempted to say that it's probably similar to the 18th century Gothic showing France or Italy. It's kind of transporting you to Yorkshire, even though, and particularly as Victorian literature becomes increasingly popular in the US in the Victorian period, it's kind of trying to represent these different accents. But it does become a really, really popular grounding technique in a lot of late Victorian literature, particularly children's literature. Secret Garden is the one that comes to mind because I remember distinctly trying to read it and trying to kind of, I think it tries to get you to perform it, which is really interesting if you think about we're still in a period where reading aloud and reading aloud to one another is really popular. Yeah. So in the same way that in the Gothic you add lots of commas to build tension, if you add in dialect, that kind of adds in a performative element to that enjoyment of sharing a text and reading that text aloud.
Well, I'm one of the few people in the world that's still reading Walter Scott, and that's it's so important in Scott. Are all these Scottish dialects that he does, and that are like I need the glossary in the back of the book to really get everything. It's like Mr. Swales talking sometimes. Like there's no way I would know what this is without a footnote sometimes. And I think Scott is so enormously popular, in the 19th century. I mean, very few of us read him now, but certainly literally everybody read Scott in the 19th century. And it's so big a part of his novels to capture the dialect of someone in text by, changing standard English to do that. So we get a lot of that in this book. Stoker loves it. He did it with Swales, with the, in Whitby, and and we get it with every working class person he meets. So good. Now we can go to Jonathan talking about Mina, because this is important too, this passage here. Mina is fast asleep and looks a little too pale. Her eyes look as though she had been crying, poor dear. I've no doubt it frets her to be kept in the dark, and it makes her doubly anxious about me and the others. But it is best as it is. It is better to be disappointed and worry in such a way now than to have her nerve broken. The doctors were quite right to insist on her being kept out of this dreadful business. I must be firm. Oh, good. That's what we need, right? Firm, Jonathan. I must be firm, for on me, this particular burden of silence must rest. I shall not ever enter on the subject with her under any circumstances. Well, he breaks all the time. He breaks his rules. Indeed, it may not be a hard task after all, for she herself has become reticent on the subject and has not spoken of the Count or his doings ever since we told her of our decision. Holy moly, there's a ton of stuff in this that, like, there's so much going on. Well, first he reiterates his desire to keep her in the dark. And I want to remind people too that this is also the same night that in the last chapter, Mina says, last night I slept, but did not dream. I must have slept soundly, for I was not waked by Jonathan coming to bed. But the sleep has not refreshed me, for today I feel terribly weak and spiritless. So, Mary, there's so much in this.
Yeah, my one main note is just hubris, because I think that's what they're all complicit and guilty of, in that, you know, even though they've read so much about what happened to Lucy, here's literally the exact same symptoms, and they're just ignoring him. But I think the way that he refers to Van Helsing and Seward as the doctors, it's interesting, because it's like he's absolving himself of any responsibility and putting it onto these kinds of unnamed professionals. Like, we know who they are. He knows who they are. He's choosing not to name them here. I think there's like an underlying thing in his mind that's you know, nagging at him, saying something's not right here. But they've agreed.
The authorities, has decided, you know, the people that should know, right?
Yeah. But they're keeping her in the dark. And I think as well, when you look back at the novel and the way that darkness and light are kind of in tension with each other, darkness is never good. And keeping her in secret, withholding knowledge, is keeping her in darkness. And that's where bad things are. Whereas they've just spent the past few novels uncovering lots of knowledge, uncovering everything that they know, bringing everything to light. And now they're covering her in darkness again. I just think it's an ominous omen.
And for Stoker to come up with that language, you know, that is so telling for the things that are going on in this novel, and perhaps hinting at the reader for us to pay attention and say, like, I talked about this in the last chapter a lot. That Stoker really wants us to notice that the men are keeping her in the dark, and that it is not a good thing, because the reader can automatically suspect that the reader knows that she's being preyed upon, you know, in the last chapter from her descriptions. So every time the reader comes across this, even in Stoker's time, they know that Jonathan's wrong. They know that, yeah, this doesn't work. Your wife is actually being preyed upon. And actually she is this night too. So apparently Jonathan is asleep and Dracula comes in and preys on Mina, because she wakes up the next day, you know, weak again. So, one thing in Jonathan's favor, he's reluctant though, right? Like, he has to find a reason to keep her in the dark. Like, he's been put through the situation with her where they share everything and they promise to share everything, and he's had to take it back. And he's bothered by it. And I think this is his justification of writing out this long explanation of, well, the authorities say so, and I'm going to stick to that. And like, he seems like he's trying to convince himself that he has to do this with Mina. So,
but it's okay, because, you know, he's going to send her home to
yes,
and
you know,
the right place for her.
Well, that's the end of the next one. He's going to send her home. We'll get to that. Like, you know, that this is how he'll solve it. Get the women out of the way. So, We'll just send her away. Yeah, maybe you should have done that to begin with. So, if you really were concerned that she might be in danger, maybe she shouldn't be in the place that's next door to Dracula's house. But he doesn't go that far. So the next day, he gets a note from Smollett, and it's a long, and it is a dirty scrap of paper. Because that's what working class guys have. They're like, hey, well, I got to send a note. Let me find a dirty scrap of paper around here to send a note to somebody. Written with a carpenter's pencil in a sprawling hand. Is there a way to tell that this is written in a carpenter's pencil? I think not, but I think that he means that maybe it's like
it's not big. A 2B, it's a chunky pencil.
Yeah, it's like big script, like you're writing with a crayon with your fist. So is the way that he's written this. And then we get all the humor over the confusion of spelling and pronunciation here, and it is Sam Bloxam Corcoran's for Poter's Court, I'll say, because Jonathan gets it wrong. Bartle Street, Walworth, Arsk for the Dep. Or, well, as Jonathan looks at it, I think he thinks it's Depite. So, Arsk for the Depite. It almost sounds, I'm sorry, that's my pirate voice, but, that's the way Jonathan's reading it. Maybe it's some extreme version of an accent. So, there's a digression, the pirate accent. Do you guys know where the pirate accent comes from? The arg, and, it sounds very almost Scottish, but it's Robert Newton. Robert Newton in Treasure Island does that accent on film, and that is the film and the performance that makes that the pirate accent forevermore. So I always wonder, what was the pirate accent like before then? Especially, I'm thinking like J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan versions. They had a different pirate accent that was not the one that we hear, and it's lost to time. So anyway,
yeah, my knowledge of pirates is very limited to the golden age of piracy, which is very early in the 18th century and lasts for about 20 years. Yeah. It's quite disappointing. Yeah.
So no, pirates are all time. They're always there. So before he leaves, he doesn't want to make Mina. She looked heavy and sleepy and pale and far from well because Dracula was sucking her blood out, and he doesn't realize that. I determined not to wake her, but that when I should return from this new search, here it is. I would arrange for her going back to Exeter. I think she would be happier in her own home with her daily tasks to interest her. That's so patronizing. Than in being here amongst us and in ignorance. And then very patronizing, and then an acknowledgement, the true acknowledgement that we're keeping her in the dark, and that has to be telling on her. But he's, but he doesn't do anything about it. His solution is to send her home. The fact that he's noticing these signs in her, and that's all that he's noticing, this kind of maybe lethargy, she's sleepy and pale, heavy and sleepy and pale she looked. There was a question I was going to hit a little later, but I'm going to hit this now, from Barbara that came in, because this will play in later as well. But Barbara had sent me a question that I'm not going to answer, that I'm going to say, let's do this next week, because it's about the kind of what's going on with Mina. She starts talking about, Mina doesn't, clearly there must be a neck wound, right? We've learned this from Lucy, that there must be a wound on Mina that Dracula's been feeding on, and we don't get any mention of that. So I want to hit it next week, Barbara, because I think that's when it really comes into play. Well, we can talk about it more because we just get hints at it now. We don't even get the Mina journal in this chapter, do we? No, we don't. We don't get Mina's journal entry in this chapter. So that's why I want to hit that next week. But she's tired and pale, and Jonathan notices that, but he's not doing anything about it. So He's gone, and he's got to go meet Sam Bloxham. And when he gets to Walworth and Potter's Court, Mr. Smollett's spelling misled me, for I asked for Potter's Court instead of Potter's Court. And then when he asks for I guess he's asking for the Depite, he gets confusion and then discovers that he asked the guy what are you? I'm the deputy. And then phonetic spelling had again misled me, Jonathan says. So this kind of, it's kind of humor, but it's humor at the expense of the working class and the way they spell and the way they will pronounce things. So
this is also heavily referencing a major Gothic trope, which is that the servant antagonizes and prolongs the discovery. One of mine and Mary's colleagues has worked on this a lot and has, I think we've mentioned it before, a really great book on it, Kathleen Hudson. But in traditionally even in the 19th century Gothic, but traditionally the servant is always, in Mysteries of Udolpho, Annette, it's like, oh, mademoiselle, and you'll never believe, and then this happened, and then this happened, and she's like, okay, get to the point, like, where's the information that I need? So you have this long tradition of the servant blocking the hero or heroine's access to the important information and like prolonging the reveal. So this is it is kind of a laugh at the expense of the working class, but it is also drawing on a much older tradition in a really interesting new way, where you've got, rather than it being the 18th century Gothic servant who says, well, such and such, Ludovico told me that there's a ghost, and then the other serving girl, she told me that she's seen, and they go on this winding path when they've asked one question. This is kind of a reimagining of that, where you have this kind of and it is humor created by the working class, but it's kind of throwing it in many ways it is a class subversion, because it's throwing the joke onto the upper class who can't do what they need to do without the servant or the working class character telling them what they know.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of, it's very Shakespearean, but this is a really traditional, really common Gothic trope that he's using here. And I do like the way that it's reimagined with these working class labourers that Jonathan has to investigate.
Anastasia just writes in the Q&A here that I find it strange how stumped Jonathan is by the phonetic spelling. Isn't shorthand phonetic? Like, he should be able to figure this out because he does shorthand.
And he can figure out Corcoran.
Yeah. So,
but also, what's a poter? Like,
yeah. I didn't like. I didn't think it would be that hard to figure out, but excuse me. But Jonathan does. But it doesn't matter, because no matter what happens, a half-crown tip put the deputy's knowledge at my disposal. So, booze and money. That's all you need to conquer the working class. Well, if you're in Jonathan's position, because it changes when you are, of the kind of upper class, then the relationship changes. But because Jonathan is a kind of working class guy, I guess because he's closer to them, he can relate to them more, he can give them money, he can buy them booze, and it's okay. Now, we'll see a difference later when Dracula, when Count Deville has to deal with the laborers. But with Jonathan, this works, and he gets from the deputy of the information where Sam Bloxham is, and a surly and then there he encounters a surly gatekeeper and a surlier foreman, both of whom were appeased with the coin. And then he suggested that he was willing to pay the day's wages to his foreman for the privilege of asking him a few questions on a private matter. And Bloxham is a smart enough fellow, though rough of speech and bearing. Again, he can't help but mention, like, I have to, if he's talking about, if he meets up with another working class person or another middle class person or an upper class person, he's not going to describe how they speak and their kind of, their bearing, right? But these guys, he has to throw that in there, that this is This is another class that Jonathan is working with, and he has to mention it. It's almost, I don't know, for the Victorian age, it's almost more important for the middle class. The class signifiers are more important for the middle class than for the working or the upper classes, aren't they? Because they're trying to navigate. They're trying to make sure they don't wind up down in the working class, but they aspire to being, kind of, like gentry, like somebody who doesn't have to work. So, yeah, your silence, I assume, assent on that, right? Yes.
I think that's what Jonathan's doing. He's basically occupying that kind of middle class rung where he can understand some parts of the working class, and he can navigate some of his ways around it with, paying through beer or with money. But then he gets stumped because he's not really working class, and there's some bits that he doesn't understand. And then again, you see this later in the chapter with the more upper class kind of business side of things, where he knows what needs to happen, but he also recognizes that he, as a middle class person, is not the one to facilitate that, and that's where he gets Lord Godalming's help, essentially. So he's kind of in the middle, trying to navigate both worlds, but not really in either.
And it's kind of goes back to that ethnography again, that sort of that tension in the middle class between the upper and lower, that there's that mutability in the middle class, that you could go down to the working class, you could ascend to the upper class, but like a character like Arthur is always going to be upper class because he's born upper class, and even if he loses everything, he'll never lose that refinement, which is why Quincy's so interesting, because Quincy's allowed more flexibility in a lot of ways than Jonathan, because in being American, he's kind of like, well, he can be both a gentleman and a labourer, he can be both educated and physical, whereas Jonathan's kind of trapped a little bit more, and that's perhaps why Jonathan's easier to effeminize. And is linked more closely with Lucy and Mina than perhaps with the other men. I don't know if that's intentional as much as it is perhaps a kind of unwitting representation of the middle classes. But it is interesting when you compare, Quincy tends to get compared to Seward and to Arthur, but I think it's more interesting to compare him with Jonathan because they're kind of in a more similar bracket. Which is very interesting when you think about the difference between, what is Quincy technically would be considered perhaps middle class in Britain, but because he's American, there's this added layer that gives him kind of more freedom and more masculinity than Jonathan's allowed.
We're getting some interesting comments in chat here too about the servant master tradition from Roger Going, from Roger and are they your parents, Mary? Or are they?
Yeah, they're my parents. Hello.
They like it. So, talking about the servant master tradition and the French tradition of farce, and Stoker supporting or subverting this tradition. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, or if you just want to. If you'll have to have a conversation about that after the show.
We can do that later.
That's great. It's a family affair here. Mary, do you want to read a little bit of this speech here? There was an old party. There was the old party would engage me awaiting, or do you not want to read in dialect?
I can. It might not. Yeah, I can. It might not be
the closest to what it's supposed to sound like of the three of us.
It might not sound exactly. Just to note, I'm not from London, and I don't speak in Cockney. So yeah, this will be me performing this as much as it will. But okay. So. There was the old party what engaged me awaiting in the house at Purfleet. He helped me to lift the boxes and put them in the dray. Curse me, but he was the strongest chap I ever struck, and him an old fella with a white moustache, one that Finn you would think he couldn't throw a shudder.
Well, I wanted to make sure we hit that. That's
even I get
it better than I would.
Yeah.
But I would have sounded like Bert from Mary Poppins if I had given that an attempt.
You should try it. I like when other people read dialect. It's fun. It's enjoyable.
We could do a whole show on that, and each of us reading dialects. So but that's an important point because we get another glimpse of Dracula. We get a glimpse of Dracula through another. That when they went to move the boxes, Dracula is there and moving them, and he's super strong and he's old. He's got a white mustache, super thin. You would think he wouldn't throw a shadow. Which is fascinating because he doesn't throw a shadow. See, so not in Stoker's world, vampires don't throw shadows. So, which is utterly, but the white mustache too. I mean, I like the hint here that Dracula does get young, but this is more recognition from Stoker, I think, about his vampires, that they have to keep feeding to Dracula has to keep feeding to maintain this youthful appearance. And so maybe this is he's at some point where he's not getting enough, and not getting enough blood in him to remain looking young. And then he's taking them, and they took these boxes to a house in Piccadilly, and I love this. Like, we took them, and then he was there. Like, he ran ahead of them and got there ahead of time, and opened the door and helped them with the boxes, and then I want to get to this next bit because because they had some other guys to help carry. 3 loafers will come around to earn a copper. And loafers is like, this is in Victorian lit. These are guys who just stand around and wait for jobs to do. They're on the street and like, there's all kinds of work that somebody would ask them to do. So they're there. So, and then the old gent give them a shilling. Oh, the old gent give them shillings, and they see him. They get so much they wanted more. But he took one of them by the shoulder and was like to throw him down the steps till the lot of them went away cussing. So Dracula, that's didn't sound nearly as good as you, but I'd love. And here's an instance where Dracula, as certainly upper class and and different class than everybody else here. When he encounters these working class people and gives them money, they're like, whoa, this is a lot. So you should give us more. Like they recognize that he doesn't understand their system, like the way that you're supposed to relate to them. And they ask for more. And then he's going to literally, throw them down the steps, grabs one of them by the shoulders, and then they went away cursing. So not a good move for Dracula too, to lose his temper. He doesn't do this earlier, right? When he encounters what's his name at the zoo, the zookeeper. The zookeeper just insults him and he doesn't lose his cool. But for just these loafer, like, Dracula's used to dealing with his, with his Romani helpers at the castle, like, do this, and then they're just doing it, and they're, not gonna. There's no back talk, but he gets back talk from these Brits, and this is also a little sly way, I think, of Stoker putting in this kind of, nationalist kind of viewpoint that, these Brit working class guys are just gonna, they're not gonna be impressed by Dracula. They have that kind of Anglo-Saxon independence, this group of people that and Dracula almost gets into an altercation with them, which would not be good.
This moment always reminds me of that scene in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at the beginning, where Mr. Hyde hits a child and then everyone turns on him. And he just throws some money to add it to make it go away. But it's a similar kind of someone who is of a kind of upper class, but also not, because Hyde is a degenerate version of Jekyll. So he doesn't quite understand or want to understand what's happening, but he creates this violent altercation that's completely unnecessary and causes all of this exposure. This working class labourer remembers this scene and potentially remembers the house more because of this altercation. So it's potentially quite dangerous for Dracula in exposing him, which I just think is interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of that, you're kind of getting that race thing again, where it's like, you know, modern Britain versus decrepit ancient Europe. And that, yeah, you've got this kind of kicking down at the working class sometimes in this novel, but it's different to things like indentured servitude. And, you know, a lot of people are thinking at this point in time about things like, well, you know, this is only, 20, 30 years before the Russian Revolution. You know, you've got an increasing kind of awareness, particularly in Britain, of the way that things are being done in certain parts of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, this kind of seemingly outdated class and hierarchy system. So whereas, like you said, in his castle, Dracula is absolute, and that directly goes against what we, particularly by this point, considered to be the British Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And the British Constitution is based on the lie of the Anglo-Saxon, because the Anglo-Saxon doesn't exist.
Stop!
Sorry to be a shock. But that, you know, particularly when we're getting to, you know, height of empire, like, you know, the British Constitution, Britain's a free man, and it doesn't matter if you're the lowest or the highest, you're a Briton, and that gives you certain rights. So that kind of, this is that kind of playing with that idea that Dracula will never, it's kind of almost hinting he'll never win here.
Mm-hmm.
Because he'll never be able to understand, like, he's a monster of the past, so modernity is always going to kind of win out at the end of the day.
Yes. And he doesn't know that these people will never surrender. So,
exactly.
You know, all right. Now we're about to get to Piccadilly and the investigation there. And just before that, I just want to do my mid-break plugs. Most importantly, everyone, this Saturday, I hope you'll join me for a very special Q&A with Mark Gatiss. That's September 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time here in the States. I think it's 8 p.m. over in England. Mark Gatiss has had a lifelong love of Dracula and all things horror. We're going to talk about Dracula. We'll field some live questions from the audience on Saturday. And remember that Dracula Club members and Rosenbach members get 50% off the registration price. Mark Gatiss is one of the creators of this year's BBC Dracula adaptation. Mark wrote the show with his Sherlock partner, Stephen Moffat, and he also plays Renfield in the show. Mark Gatiss has also presented the TV documentary In Search of Dracula for the BBC, in which he visited the Rosenbach to study Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula. That was how I first met him. Mark Gatiss has also played Dracula in Big Finish's full cast audio drama of the novel, which I think is quite excellent. It came out in 2016, and recently returned in the role for Big Finish's prequel Dracula's Guests, and then a sequel, Dracula's War, with Dracula being revived to help in the World War I effort. And it's not just Mark Gatiss we're bringing to you, because on next Sunday's show, we'll welcome Kim Newman as our special guest. Kim is a movie critic, author, and broadcaster. He's a contributing editor to Sight and Sound and Empire magazines. His books about film include Nightmare Movies and Kim Newman's Video Dungeon. His fiction includes Professor Moriarty, The Hound of the D'Urbervilles, and An English Ghost Story, which is a novel from just a couple years ago, I think now. He's the lead writer on the BBC4's show Mark Kermode's Secrets of Cinema, and Kim Newman's Anno Dracula series, of which this is the first book, and I think it's 4 books now or 5, I can't remember. Reimagines the Dracula universe by having Dracula triumph in his conquest in Victorian England. This first novel is filled with both well-known fictional characters and historical characters. It's one of the most exciting Dracula adaptations I've ever read. I'm so happy that we'll have him on the show on Sunday. On Wednesday, October 7th, at 6. There's so much. I'm like, this is jam-packed. On Wednesday, October 7th at 6:30 p.m. EDT, Dacre Stoker will return, and he'll do his multimedia presentation, Stoker on Stoker. Dracula members and Rosenbach members also get 50% off that registration. Don't forget to tune into Monday Drac Chat tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. as one of our Dracufile audience members joins me to continue talking about this week's chapter. And tomorrow's Dracufile joining me will be Holly Graves, one half of the Ozarks branch of the Dracula Club. It's Matt H in the audience there, who's apparently the other half of the Ozarks branch. I think I got that right. The Ozarks are a mountain range in the United States, if you guys don't know. So it's and they're down south there, Missouri or Arkansas. I'm trying to remember where you're from, Holly. Maybe she'll throw that in there, into the chat. Missouri. So that's where she is. And sorry, lost my page. I can't do a show without a script. Remember to watch Monday Drac Chat. You need to register for the Zoom link. So if you're new to this, it's not the same link to Sundays with Dracula. It's for Rosenbach and Dracula Club members only. There's no Facebook live stream. We don't post the show afterwards. You can only watch it live on Zoom. And I have another thing to share with you guys, just an appearance that I'm going to be making to talk about Dracula. And that is at Monsterama this year. This year, Monsterama was canceled because of the shutdown, and they're combining with SpyCon 2020. The Monsterama is something that happens every year in Atlanta, Georgia, for a weekend, and they're doing a virtual one this year. And it's October 9th to 11th. It's a whole weekend of virtual programs you can sign up for. It is free. They're not charging registration for this, but they do ask for people to make a donation to the Motion Picture and Television Fund. And this is the website, and I think Steve has put it in the chat, and you can click on there and donate. But in the programming, on Friday, October 9th, I think it's around 9 p.m. I can't remember. It's in the evening, but it's in the programming slot there. There will be a panel called Masters of Dracula, in which Dracula authorities pull back the curtain and discuss the origins of the most famous vampire. And it's the great Dracula scholar, John Edgar Browning, moderating, and the panel is David Scal and me. So David and I will talk about all things, and with Browning too. We'll talk about all things Dracula at Monsterama on October 9th. So I'm very excited to be part of that this year. Back to the show, and let us Jonathan is going to track down, as he's discovered that some of these boxes were taken to this house in Piccadilly, and he goes and at Piccadilly Circus, and he's walking westward beyond the Junior Constitutional. He comes across the house described. There's this decrepit windows encrusted with dust. The shutters are up. The framework was black with time. The iron, and from the iron, the paint had mostly scaled away. So this looks like a house that Dracula would inhabit, and he does. And he needs to figure out where, like, information like how he can find out about this house. And he discovers that from one of the loafers hanging around the street, that it was, he goes back to the Mews, right? Behind the place. And he finds out that it was Mitchell, Sons and Candy were the house agents, and they could tell him something. So he goes to find out from them. But first, I just want to ask about this Piccadilly location in general, and if you guys might be more familiar with Piccadilly, that area in London, and could describe that maybe to some. And is there any significance and how is this different from the other places that he has sent boxes to?
Piccadilly is more central, so I know less about it, but it's definitely the other places that we've been are more working class. So I think we've been to an area near Whitechapel. I think there was someone lived in Bethnal Green. went down south of the river, and then I think Mr. Bloxham worked in the Poplars, which would be near the docks, which is near Limehouse. So that's a little bit east of the East End, and anyone that's read the Limehouse Golem or the Limehouse Golem, that's set there. But it's basically all of the areas we've been to so far are working class. You've got the docks, big immigrant areas and populations, massive working class areas, quite poor. Piccadilly is more central, and it's just probably nicer. I don't know. I know less about Piccadilly. I don't know. Maybe Lauren, you have something to add?
Yeah, Piccadilly's Westminster. It's not that big. I don't know if he's referring. I know we call Piccadilly an area, but it is technically just a street. But it's near Hyde Park. Now we would consider it to be very touristy. But certainly kind of late Victorian, it would have been quite notable. I think Piccadilly Circus, Hyde Park, I think, is either side. So it's not a low-key area, I would say. It is kind of a prime location. I think
my skull ice cubes they've held up pretty well in my ice bucket here. So
if I remember rightly, I think Wilde talks about Piccadilly quite a lot. I think The Importance of Being Earnest, one of the houses is on Piccadilly. Which is interesting considering their connection. But yeah, like Mary said, that's just me trying to think about placing it a little bit more.
My mum might know, so if she has any anything she wants to add, I guess put it in the chat. My mum's from London, so she knows it better than me.
Is this
commenting? I can see him. Hi, Mary's mum.
Oh yeah, there you go. Definitely upper class, full of beautiful Portland stone
upper class. Then are we talking
and
upper class 19th century, or is this okay? So yeah, think Lord Peter Wimsey, and I don't know who that is.
Oh, Jeeves and Worcester is partially Piccadilly, isn't it?
I don't know.
I think. Yeah.
Well, that's where this house is, and Jonathan now, as Gumshoe Jonathan, he's on the case and he's going to the house agent. And this time, because it's a house agent, he can't just bribe him with money or booze. So he's got to, and he asks, like if he can have some information, and this guy just blows him off, 3 times. I think he says to him, I'm not telling you. And then Jonathan pulls out the Lord card, right? I act on the part of Lord Godalming, and these words put a different complexion on affairs, he says. Then the house agent says, it will be a pleasure if we can so far deviate from our rules as to give the required information to his lordship. And Jonathan knows how to work with people. He knows how to work with, different classes of people. He knows how to get things done. And this makes him a really effective investigator. But it's funny that the house agent has no problem at all breaking confidentiality. He's going to check on it, of course, but we know the answer is going to be yes, because the Lord is asking for the details. And then a great little detail here, right? That Jonathan, before he heads back, he wants to get a cup of tea at the Aerated Bread Company and came down to Purfleet by the next train. First, the Aerated Bread Company. This is a real thing, right? And they said this, the ABC?
Yeah, it's John, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Douglas, who it invented this method of making bread, basically to use less yeast and less time kneading bread, so it would be more mechanical and would need less time with a person. So I think he had this patented, and then opened a tea shop in Islington, which is, I'm assuming that's where Jonathan has gone, which is slightly north east London, near near kind of Hackney and that kind of area. So I don't know why I find this odd why he's at Piccadilly and then decides to go to this aerated bread company, and then he would have to go back to essentially the East End. So Tower Hill would be the underground tube connection, and then there's like a couple of minutes walk to Fenchurch station, which is the overground to Purfleet. So he must have really wanted some bread, I guess.
I think it's the modernity thing again.
Yeah.
Trying to cram in another kind of, look how modern we are, ignoring the fact that you're going pretty out of your way to go to Islington.
And very real. Like, he's telling his audience that this is a real place, that you guys understand this. Again, this is Dracula's invading places where, like near the Starbucks that you go to, I mean, it's not that far from saying something like that it's the local Starbucks, it's the local shop that people would recognize.
I think it is Dalgleish, isn't it? Is how you say it. Yeah. I think it's a Scottish name.
So the aerated bread company, Jonathan stops there on his way home. And Purfleet, is Purfleet where the asylum is? That's where he's saying the asylum is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're at Seward's, aren't they?
Yeah, so Fenchurch Street Station is that overhead station that's located in the East End, near Whitechapel, near Aldgate, and you literally walk a couple of minutes to Tower Hill, which connects you to the underground station and the underground lines. And I think one of the first lines was the Circle line, which is my favourite line because it connects Tower Hill to King's Cross, which is how I get home. But it's like a kind of corkscrew line that connects like London and King's Cross with Euston and Paddington. But it's great to connect to Fenchurch to then get out of London. So then the overhead line would run from Fenchurch, which is in the East End, via Limehouse, all the way out to the coast, South End. But in the middle is Purfleet. And Purfleet in the 19th century would have been a very small town, well connected to London. So I think you're probably looking at half an hour to an hour's journey, but not in a city, so kind of a bit more secluded.
Is it Essex? Is
Essex? Yeah,
it is Essex, right?
Yeah, definitely Essex. There's a lot of bits of London that are technically in that kind of, is this Greater London or is this Essex? But Purfleet is definitely Essex. So it's specifically not London. So this is, I always see Carfax House as his kind of safe home, or kind of like main hub and lair. It's connected to the Thames, so if he wants to get a quick boat out of there, he can. It's connected to the railway, so he can get into London really quickly. And obviously you've got really good connections to lots of, labourers and people who work on carts and stuff. So he can be safe, be secluded, but get into London really quickly and spread his dirt boxes around. He can also leave if he needs to. Yeah.
Do you think Essex being more rural plays a role there, Mary?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not London. It's not a city, and it would have been a very small town. And I think we
hit on this a little bit the last time you guys were here, but talk about Essex in relation to Dracula and why this is, and how this relates to because Stoker's put him there, right? This is where Carfax and the asylum are. Not really London, because we all just assume it's in London, especially American readers reading this, we don't know the geography.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that it's not London, but maybe that's just because I'm from Essex. But I do think that it is, but it seems to have been chosen for that purpose. It's not It's not where there's loads of people around, but it's not in a kind of completely secluded, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and it has good connections.
Access, right? Yeah.
That's the thing. He's safe, and he can scheme, and he can get into London and start putting his feelers out. And he's working, you know, he's got some boxes in the East End. He's starting to go to Piccadilly and North London and these kinds of things. He's working his way out, but if he needs to, he can get away really easily by the Thames, by the river. It's a docking town as well. So
Linda in the Q&A asks, when was the tube constructed? And we had this in one of the previous chapters when the underground is mentioned, that this is the first underground railway in the world that's constructed in London, and it's pretty close to. It's not that far, not that far from when Stoker's writing, right?
Yeah. So the Metropolitan Railway, which was the first working passenger railway, was opened in 1863, and then the Circle Line that I mentioned, which basically is what the Metropolitan Railway became, was finished in 1884, and I think, like I say, it connected Paddington, which is quite a bit way out, with Euston, King's Cross, the city, so the financial centre, and then also Tower Hill, which is obviously the connection out of London. But yeah, the kind of mid 19th century, and then the Circle Line would have been finished in 1884.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so it's at least even begun and founded, you know, a little more than 30 years before Stoker, right? So it really is, you know, quite established. Although I think one of the annotators, it might have been Les Klinger, talked about how, but frequently the underground it was just a big ditch, you know, with walls. So there wasn't quite underground yet for some of it, but it quickly develops though into literally tunnels under the earth.
Yeah. Still a work in progress in a lot of things, and I think they do continue to expand it.
But another call out, as Lauren was saying, another call out to modernity. Mm-hmm. You know, another reminder that that we're in modern times here, fighting this beast from the past. So Jonathan gets back, and everybody's home. And again, we get more reminders like, reader, if you're not paying attention, Mina is pale and tired. So another mention of it here. And for Jonathan, it wrung my heart to think that I had to keep anything from her, and so caused her inquietude. And then it took all my courage to hold the wise resolution, not just the resolution, the wise resolution of keeping her out of our grim task. And then he completely misreads her, and he says she seems somehow more reconciled. No, she's not. Or else, as we know from her, you know, her journal entries in the last chapter, she seems more reconciled, or else the very subject seems to have become repugnant to her. For when any accidental allusion is made, she actually shudders. And then he says, our growing knowledge would be torture to her. Well, clearly, growing knowledge would help her deal with what's going on. And he thinks that, well, again, Stoker's beating the drum, and Stoker's reminding the readers that, you know, this is going on. The men think that this is the situation, but you as a reader know that this isn't what's going on. Which I think is in Stoker's favor, you know, in a kind of way, if we're arguing how progressive Stoker is. Like, he doesn't think this is a good idea in a sense, or at least he's showing the readers, and the readers can make up their mind that this isn't a good situation to keep Mina in the dark. But Mina's really more in anguish and not knowing what is going on, not what Jonathan is saying. And I think that's easy for us to decipher as a reader. But that shuddering line is really interesting. And I want to ask you guys what you think of Mina at this point. And my allergies are starting to like kick in right now. Talking about Lauren battling something, my allergies are really bothering me. I'm just going to mute for.
Yeah, just to point out that I don't have COVID. This is unfortunately a different coronavirus known as the common cold.
Good, thank you. But I have allergy. I have ragweed allergies. That's what I have, which is nothing to get any sympathy for. But I'm going to mute for just a second here, and I'm going to ask you guys about Mina and shuddering and her, what's going on with her right now.
I find this bit hilarious because I can never get past the fact that Jonathan's like, my wife is more affectionate than usual, and then just leaves her in the bedroom and walks away.
I think it's hilarious that he completely misreads all of her body language. So you have that bit where she was more affectionate with me than ever and clung to me as though she would detain me, and he interprets that as thank God the ceasing of telling things had made no difference between us, as if he thinks, oh she wants me.
Yeah, she's still affectionate towards me. Not like, oh, maybe if I actually stayed by her side and kept her with me and let her know things, then she wouldn't be getting preyed on by a literal vampire. He's just like, oh, sweet thing, pats her on the head and goes back to his man's talk.
So has she not put it together that she's being preyed upon by Dracula and doesn't want, or she kind of in some way knows this and doesn't want to admit it or talk about it out loud?
Or she's under his thrall.
That's what I've always read it as, that there's an element of a glamour here, because with Lucy, yes, we don't know. They don't know, we don't know. Like, well, we suspect, but, they aren't aware. But I've always kind of read it that there's some kind of, you get this a lot in kind of fantasy tropes, that when a curse or a spell is placed upon someone, they can't speak of it or they're not fully aware of it. And I've always kind of read it as that Mina's not, she's kind of under the glamour, so she's not able to put it together.
I was going to put Barbara's question next week, as I already mentioned, but actually I'm going to throw it out there now because maybe this is the best time that Barbara's right. This is the best time to deal with this. She writes that Dracula has obviously feasted on Mina, as she's described, with all the symptoms of anemia, blood loss, but we never hear anything about even one drop of blood. Nor is there any mention of a neck wound. At least Mina's not mentioning one. She was aware of Lucy's wound and even blamed herself for being careless with the brooch and causing it. So it would seem to be of some significance to her if, when she woke up with one as well. Lucy hid her mark under a band. Was she under Dracula's spell? But the men finally became aware of it. Do you think Mina is also hiding the clues since she's also fallen under his spell? Does she even know? So, I mean, I think you've already even partly answered that you think maybe she is under Dracula's spell at this point, and that she must have a wound, right?
I think she's definitely hiding the clues, and the men are just not looking and paying attention to her.
I also wonder if there's an element of, like, I don't know, body positivity. Like Lucy and Mina notices Lucy's wound because Lucy and Mina share a bed. And we always have this image of Lucy being a lot, I don't like to use the phrase loose because it has negative connotations, but Lucy is, she's not as restrained in herself. She's a lot more comfortable, she's a lot more expressive. So Mina noticing Lucy's wound is more natural. Mina is a more constrained character in a lot of ways. And I kind of get that idea that perhaps, she's always, like, because you were supposed to, I mean, I would be breaking all the rules right now. When you're around in the day, you're supposed to have, like, even with the old Regency dresses, you're meant to have your lace, you're meant to have something up to your neck, you're meant to have a shawl on. Mina, is probably upkeeping all of these things. And it kind of hints something about Jonathan being a shit husband. Like, if he's not noticed, like, Lucy's wound is noticed by Mina.
He says, thank God the ceasing of telling things has made no difference between us. Like,
yeah. Like, yeah, you would think, but I think there's an element here that, like, almost that Mina's propriety and I don't want to say she's uptight or rigid and, but, like, it's almost enabling Dracula's preying upon her because it's not as obvious as it was with Lucy because Mina doesn't have a Lucy.
Well, even with Lucy covered her neck. She had a ribbon around her neck that she covered up the wound. You know, you could say that, oh, maybe she just realized she has a wound that she doesn't, you know, it's just, I don't want to show the sore I have on my neck. But the men have to remove that to actually see it. And, but it begs the question, especially because we know that when Lucy is asleep, she is under Dracula's influence. He tries to conceal certain things. So is Mina, do you think Mina is in some way under the thrall of Dracula and would be concealing these things?
I think so.
I think so, and as well, it reminds me of Buffy versus Dracula, because Buffy does the exact same thing where she puts the scarf around her neck, and someone has to take it off, and she does it almost subconsciously. She hides it, even though she's, you know, part of this group that's looking for Dracula.
Yeah.
Good. And yeah, good observation. I'd forgotten that. Yeah, she does that.
Yeah. And because, you know, for Mina, like Lucy wearing the ribbon, that's maybe a bit more like, well, why are you wearing a ribbon? Or why are you wearing, whereas for Mina, no one would be like, why are you wearing a shawl? Why is your collar buttoned up? Like, she's a school teacher. Like, if you think about a lot of the stage adaptations, Mina is always put together, whereas, you know, Lucy's got her hair down, or she's, you know, wearing slightly free. Like, Mina's usually always presented as like buttoned up, high neckline, hair in a bun, you know, this kind of, I don't know, more conscious adherence to propriety. So it wouldn't, no one would be like, oh, weird that you keep hiding your neck, Mina.
It's interesting we don't get any descriptions like that of her, actual descriptions in the novel, but we do get all this kind of, you know, she is very businesslike. She certainly, you know, doesn't break any, you know, rules of decorum. So you would assume definitely that this is the way she presents herself. Jonathan then tells the other guys what's going on, and we have to get into this house in Carfax. And I love Arthur's response here is, this burglary business is getting serious. So that's a great line for him to deliver. But they have to figure out a way of getting into this house that doesn't require them just breaking in, because they can't just go break into a house now in Piccadilly, which is, as you just described, is central London. There's people there. You can't just, you know, break into the house. And then Jonathan throws another line at the end of his entry here that Mina sleeps soundly and her breathing is regular. Her forehead is puckered up into little wrinkles as though she thinks even in her sleep. She is still too pale, but does not look so haggard as she did this morning. Tomorrow will, I hope, mend all this. She will be herself at home in Exeter. Oh, but I am sleepy. And as we know now, that why are you so sleepy? Because Dracula is about to put you out and feast on your wife. So sorry, big spoilers for people who haven't read the next chapter yet, but you have to mention it, because as we're doing the deep dive, we have to point out these things that are going on in the text. And that's what's going on in the text at this point. So we jump back again. So now we go Jonathan for 2 days, and now we're going to jump back again the day before to get Seward's account of what happened after they went to Carfax and slept for a couple hours, and then went about their business and what they discovered. And for Seward, it's all about Renfield, that he is puzzled afresh about Renfield. His moods change, and he says his moods change so rapidly that I find it difficult to keep touch of them, and as they always mean something more than his own well-being, they form a more than interesting study. And he describes him as at this point as a man of commanding destiny, which I find really unusual for this description, that he is a man of commanding destiny. Subjectively, of course, he did not really care for any of the things of mere earth. He was in the clouds and looked down on all the weaknesses and wants of us poor mortals, is the way he is describing him. And that Renfield And he asked him about flies again, and Renfield says, "The fly, my dear sir, has one striking feature. Its wings are typical of the aerial powers of the psychic faculties. The ancients did well when they typified the soul as a butterfly." So this is like where we're at with Renfield now. And Seward asks him if he wants life, again, if he wants to consume these lives or the souls. He says, "Is it a soul you're after now?" And Renfield says, "Oh, no, I want no souls. Life is all I want." Here he brightened up. "I am pretty indifferent about it at present. Life is all right. I have all I want. You must get a new patient, doctor, if you wish to study zoophagy." Renfield even knows that he's a zoophagist, patient here. That, like, I guess Seward has maybe let this slip at some time, that he has this new qualification for him as a new, description of him as a patient. Renfield talks about, I'm in the same position which Enoch occupied spiritually, and Enoch is one who walked with God, and Renfield has to tell Seward this because that's a rather obscure, biblical reference. And he says, "I don't want any souls, indeed, I don't. I couldn't use them if I had them. They would be no manner of use to me. I couldn't eat them or..." He suddenly stopped, and the old cunning look spread over his face like a wind sweep on the surface of the water. "And doctor, as to life, what is it after all, when you've got all you require and you know that you will never want? That is all. I have friends, good friends like you, Dr. Seward." He said this with a leer of inexpressible cunning. "I know that I shall never lack the means of life." And he's, Renfield has changed in a sense, and Seward has recognized this. Do you guys have anything on this, or should I move on to then what Renfield does? But this Renfield's okay now with his position. Like, what's his relationship with Dracula right now?
I think this bit is really interesting with the Enoch reference, because for anyone who doesn't know, in Genesis, it talks about Enoch, walking with God or being with God because he was faithful. And the idea is that he didn't die. He was taken bodily into heaven by God. So if you think about all this discussion about life and souls and the afterlife, Renfield is talking about Enoch and making all these parallels with somebody who didn't die, but who was rewarded by God, the master. And before this passage, you have, "I'm not even concerned in his especially spiritual doings, so far as I'm concerned with things purely terrestrial." And in my edition, that "his" is capitalized with a capital H. And I think it's ambiguous as to whether it's talking about God or Dracula as his master. But that kind of relationship, as Enoch walked with God and Renfield wants to walk with Dracula in some way that's tied to a death or a not death. But I think there's also, so in Hebrews 11, which is a New Testament text, I think there's a really interesting mention of Enoch that says, "By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him." But before that, so that's Hebrews 11 verse 5. And before that, in verse 4, you have a mention of Cain and Abel. So by faith again, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So everyone focuses on the idea of the blood is the life, which you get in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. But in Genesis chapter 4, with the Cain and Abel story, it's basically the story of the first murder. Abel is killed by Cain, and his blood seeps into the ground and then speaks to God and tells of the crime. So you have this kind of link between blood and life, and then in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the kind of prohibition against drinking and eating and consuming blood, because blood is the life, because it's the life force. And then here in the Enoch story that follows in Hebrews 11, this Cain reference, a reference to Enoch and the importance of faith and life, and this story about someone who doesn't see death. I just think, but I just think it's really interesting.
I'm keying in on that word. The word that's in that's using that translation is the translate. That Enoch was translated, and the original, kind of meaning of that word is translate is mean to kind of move beyond, like to move from one place to another. Frequently talked about in the Middle Ages, the translation of saints' relics, which means they were taking the saints' relics and moving them from one place to another. And this is a much deeper meaning. This kind of translation is this movement from kind of corporal life to maybe spiritual life. Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, so the idea of Enoch is that he's taken into heaven, and he has a kind of celestial life. He's the kind of secrets of heaven are revealed to him, and I think he's described or likened to Metatron, which is the scribe of God. So he has like a lot of celestial revelation and knowledge, and he's on this kind of spiritual celestial plane. So that kind of physical movement from earth to heaven, but then also the kind of the difference in that he hasn't died. So his body has been taken literally into heaven,
which is even more important than these other people around Enoch, like his father. I think Methuselah is Methuselah his father or something? Like all these people who get to live.
Methuselah's father.
Yeah,
all these people get to live a very long time, but Enoch gets something even more. But not only does he live a long time, it's something like over 300 years or something. Like, boy, I wish. Like all the books I could read, right? But he gets even better because he gets because this life on earth doesn't matter. He gets to know these, and he didn't even have to go to the school of Mons to learn this stuff. So he goes right to God to learn it all. That's fascinating. Where that's just a great little reference from Stoker that he just breezes over. I just can't imagine. I understand that people in Stoker's time, certainly in the 19th century, just even regular readers understood the Bible that much better and would catch references that we wouldn't catch. But this one also seems a little obscure to me, even for them, doesn't it? Or do you think that everybody knows who Enoch is in the 19th century?
They'd probably get the Genesis reference. Maybe probably the Hebrews, maybe not. It is slightly a bit more obscure in terms of Enoch, but I just thought it was interesting that it comes in this passage that talks about faith, and then also mentions the Cain and Abel story. So
Stoker has to know this. Like, he has to understand that this is where this is, and what's going on in the Bible around this, that he's using it. So you would think even if he's not doing it consciously, he would. I think people in the 19th century would know these texts a lot better than we do today. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna move here, so I might have to start moving quickly. So we always talk a lot, which is good. But Seward decides that he needs to. Well, he goes back to Van Helsing, and to see what he thinks. But Van Helsing's busy poring over the records, and Van Helsing seems to think that by accurate knowledge of all details, he will light upon some clue. Well, you would, so that's good. Like, Van Helsing's being, Sherlock Holmes here. But he goes back to Renfield again, more pushing, prodding. Let's talk about this issue more. What about souls? I don't want any more souls. But I asked, how are we to get the life without getting the soul also? And Renfield says, a nice time you'll have sometime when you're flying out there with the souls of. Oh no, I followed it up. So Seward says, a nice time you'll have sometime when you're flying out there with the souls of thousands of flies and spiders and birds and cats buzzing and twittering and meowing all around you. You've got their lives, you know, and you must put up with their souls. And that, like, you know, he doesn't like that. And he put his fingers to his ears and shut his eyes. There was something pathetic in it that touched me. It also gave me a lesson, for it seemed that before me was a child, only a child, though the features were worn and the stubble on the jaws was white. There's also a reminder there, too, that Renfield is 59 years old. So, you know, he's pushing 60. And I think we often imagine him as a younger, more, you know, virile man in this. But he's an older guy here. Seward's back and forth here is really, you know, kind of pushing him to, it's necessary in a sense, because they need to find out what Renfield's connection is with the Count, and clearly Renfield's zoophagous, you know, obsession here is come to play, and is really in play, and they need to work this out to combat Dracula. And then, but Renfield is just, but I don't want their souls buzzing around me all the same. And, you know, and he stops suddenly, as though reminded of a forbidden topic. So we also get the sense that Renfield could say more, but he's being prevented from that, from Dracula. And Seward thinks to himself, this is the second time he has suddenly stopped at the word drink, because he was saying there isn't anything in them to eat or, and then that's when Renfield stops suddenly. So he doesn't want to mention drink. And then he says, like, yeah, none of this stuff, you know, means anything to me. The lesser carnivora doesn't, you know, interest me. Why do you plague me about souls? Haven't I got enough to worry and pain and distract me already without thinking of souls? If you only knew the problem I have to face and that I am working out, you would pity and tolerate and pardon me. Pray, do not put me in a straight waistcoat. I want to think and cannot think freely when my body is confined. I'm sure you will understand. So Renfield's in some turmoil here, and is really battling what is going on. I had an interesting question from Adam, because then in a little bit, Renfield will be back to eating spiders and flies. But I want to hit it here in this kind of moment of Renfield in turmoil. Adam had asked a question to me about Renfield, and he said that I previously thought that I had at least a somewhat reasonable grasp of the relationship between Renfield's mood, violent, haughty, depressed, and when he is practicing his zoophagy or not, and the comings, going, and the predations of the Count. In this week's chapter, my previous analyses seem shot to hell. Am I missing something, or is Renfield just going off the rails due to stress and perhaps his newfound conscience? Because we also have to remember that he's been warning Mina and the men to leave and that they are in danger. So what do you guys think about Renfield's condition at this point and how he's expressing his condition? Either one.
I mean, he's clearly unwell, and you know, there's obviously a reason that he's in a mental asylum, and Dracula is clearly preying on his kind of tendencies or his wants and his obsessions, which seem to kind of focus on life and death. He's not worried about souls, but he is worried about life, and perhaps he has some anxiety about dying, and that's how it's manifesting. But Dracula is preying on that, and like you say, now he's getting a conscience because he's having to think about his actions affecting other people, and then also potentially the souls that he's consumed. You know, he hasn't been thinking about that before. He's just been thinking about himself and consuming life, and Dracula's obviously offered him everything that he wants, but it clearly comes with a price. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like, he's obviously unwell, and all of this stuff is just clearly exacerbating him and stressing him out. And yeah,
I like that he's recognizing the price now, the price that he's having to pay for all this. And I was also thinking too that Renfield's norm is zoophagy. You know, that before he even comes to the asylum, he has this obsession with consuming life, and that is what people that is his kind of, you know, mental illness that causes people to say, oh, you need to go to an asylum, and his friends take him and he signs himself in. But this is before he's even connected with Dracula, that he already has this idea that I have to consume life, and that is why in the end we have to assume that even if we don't see any others, there are plenty of other patients in this asylum, but Renfield is the one that winds up connected with Dracula, and it's because he has this, you know, idea, this, you know, obsession that he needs to consume life, and that is what connects him with Dracula. But I really think things are kind of going a bit haywire for him now. And so his reactions are going to be going kind of haywire, that it isn't necessarily tied to when Dracula's President Carfax, then he's okay. And then when he goes to leave, he gets upset. Like, none of that seems to happen to him anymore, because he's dealing with that he knows Dracula is coming to invade the asylum and prey upon me, and is already preying upon me. Like, Renfield knows what's going on over the last couple nights now. So, and
Yeah,
even from the very basic point that he has to have been the one that invited Dracula in. So,
I think I mentioned this before. There was a stage adaptation of Dracula that toured the UK 2 years ago, and Renfield was female in that adaptation, and there was this weird sort of, I still don't fully understand what it was intending to do because it wasn't the best, but there was a scene where you know, Renfield is talking to Dracula and she calls him master, and there's this kind of, you know, it's kind of taking a lot of the elements, but then she essentially births Dracula into the asylum. And it was really, really strange. But I think what they were trying to do was pick up on this, maybe this kind of element that, you know, perhaps with maybe again, he's been glamoured, and there's, you know, some madness that's coming from that, some kind of clarity, maybe a kind of Lovecraftian, once you become aware that there is more to the mortal and there is the supernatural, that starts to play on you. It was kind of an interesting concept, but I don't think they expanded it fully enough for it to really work. But I suppose it does shed light back on Renfield and his relationship to Dracula and where that madness comes from. And I think there's a lot around this time around like philosophizing. There's these people that seek to know more, and then when they do discover more, it's like a corrupting force, and they are aware of the horror in the potential, but they can't go back. And I wonder if perhaps there's something there to be said about Renfield, and his relationship to Dracula.
Well, Seward at this point gives us a very nice summary of Renfield too, that, you know, his kind of, you know, case summary here. He will not mention drinking, fears the thought of being burdened with the soul of anything, has no dread of wanting life in the future, despises the meaner forms of life altogether, though he dreads being haunted by their souls. So that's clearly a conflict that Renfield is working with right now. Logically, all these things point one way. He has some assurance of some kind that he will acquire some higher life. He will be Enoch. He will walk with his master. He dreads the consequence, the burden of a soul. Then it is a human life he looks to, Seward writes. And the assurance? Merciful God, the Count has been to him, and there is some new scheme of terror afoot. Dude, you already know that he's connected with the Count. So so later he tells Van Helsing, and Van Helsing's just grave and asks to go see him. And then Renfield's just in his room collecting sugar for flies again. They've gone as far as they're going to go with getting information out of Renfield. He's not really going to reveal anything at this point. So it's going to take something much more extreme to do that. Next, we get the letter from Mitchell, Sons and Candy to Lord Godalming about the house in Piccadilly. And it's just this really obsequious, fawning letter, right? My lord, we are at all times only too happy to meet your wishes. We beg with regard to the desire of your lordship expressed by Mr. Harker on your behalf to supply the following information concerning the sale and purchase of number 347 Piccadilly. The original vendors are the executors of the late Mr. Archibald Winters Suffield. The purchaser is a foreign gentleman, Count Deville, which is hilarious. And if you're not catching that right away, it's Count Deville, and it's, you know, Dracula's little pun on the false name that he'll use. It's like Angel Heart, or the novel Falling Angel by William Hortzberg. The movie Angel Heart has Robert De Niro playing Satan in it, and his name is Louis Cypher. And, you know, it's just this cute little pun that they do. But Count Deville is my favorite because we remember early on with Dracula and Jonathan the Castle, he's kind of, it's not like he's light and fun loving, but the Count does have a kind of sense of humor, and especially dealing with these people. And this is a great little example of it, that, you know, that he's going to pull this little pun on his name, that he's Count Deville, and he has leased these houses. What's fascinating too is in the typescript of Dracula, there is an entirely different letter from the house agents, and it's like 3 times as long as this one. And Stoker winds up cutting it and replacing it with this. And in the original, it's still fawning and about the lordship's wishes, and we beg with regard to the desire of your lordship, and all this stuff. But they go into more detail here. The other properties past Mr. Trollope and Mr. Pickford are the vendors, the people trying to come up with this property, or to sell this property. We had a call about 12 o'clock, a call from a gentleman who said it was Count Deville, and that he had called to make a purchase of the house in Piccadilly. As such purchases are not generally effected over the counter, so to speak, if your lordship will pardon the trade familiarity of the phrase. Our Mr. Leach, who was attending to him, suggested a reference or the name of his solicitor, while at the same time explaining blah, blah, blah. And they even named the sum of £2,000 is what he pays for this house. And he just took from his pocket a checkbook and said, when you have received the money from the bank, please have the deed of sale made out in my favor. I shall call for it in 2 days, and walked out. He has evidently been accustomed to this offhand method of business. The check was duly honored by Messrs. Coots and Company, the famous bank, the Coots Bank, and the deed of sale was made out to him. The Christian name had to be left blank. Be at our request, he filled it up himself when he called with the name Deville. We handed him the keys and have not since heard of or from him. So there's a much longer explanation of what happened in this real estate transaction. And it might seem that, well, you know, big deal, like it's a real estate transaction. So maybe Stoker decided, like, well, I don't need all that information. I'll just put this much shorter letter in here. Like, the real point is that they're going to, you know, comply with the request because it's Lord Godalming, and give him the information. But there's details in this first letter, including more names too. There's names, there's numbers, the house price, there's other details. And he mentioned these names, Trollope and Pickford and Leach. Well, Leach doesn't turn up in the notes, but Trollope and Pickford do. And here's a very interesting point about this too. Well, I think it's interesting. In that when he mentions Trollope and Pickford in the notes, it seems as if he has more of a story that he was going to tell about these guys. And I think that passage in the original typescript, which you can read in the drafts of Dracula, is really what's why he's decided to cut it, is because he's cut these details out of the novel. And let me just share this bit from Stoker's notes today. And here we go. This is from the calendar which he's used to like keep his plot clear. He's got all the dates here and the days of the week. The days of the week don't matter, but it's the dates that Stoker needs to keep track of here so he doesn't confuse his plot, because so much of it winds up overlapping. And this, we're going to jump back to a few weeks before, and he mentions here's a good spot, and this is September here, and this is when Lucy is being preyed upon. And at this part of the diary, I'm going to go, actually it's a little earlier. It's when Lucy's being preyed upon. And here on September 4th, he writes, Seward's diary right here. Flyman, violent at sunset. And then here is Trollope's visit from the Count. And then 2 days later, he has Count's, on September 6th, he has Count's letter to Pickford, Seward's wire to Van Helsing, worse. So the worse being that Lucy is worse now. And that is what Seward is conveying to him. But it's the Trollope, and it's Pickford, and Count's letter to, and Trollope's visit from the Count. So these are actually incidents or scenes that Stoker has imagined that are important in this novel that he is going to write about. And he probably did. Those scenes probably existed in some kind of earlier manuscript that disappeared once the transcript, once the typescript was made, and they were completely cut out. But maybe that's why he decided to completely rewrite the letter, because he's taken out the Trollope and Pickford scenes, which he's mentioned earlier, and which we know if he didn't write them, he certainly intended to, because he put them in the very specific breakdown of the calendar. And I love this, especially because Dracula is really busy right now. He's not only feeding on Lucy at night, but he's also going to meet with these different estate agents, Pickford and Trollope, to disperse all his things. And he's not just doing it through writing to people to do it. He's actually meeting with them, according to the notes that Stoker had originally envisioned. And if we look at the calendar here, let me put this. Let me share this too. This is the entire calendar, and this is like the very beginning, where he has a few things here, and here's the stuff that he winds up cutting out, these early letters between Hawkins and Dracula and that kind of stuff. And look how busy it gets. It gets super busy because he's got all these overlapping things going on. Dracula in Transylvania, and Mina and Lucy in Whitby, and Seward in the asylum. So everything's overlapping, and he needs to fill up in very detailed ways this calendar about what is going on every day. And then we get to here, where this is the summer. In the summer, it's a little less busy. And then August, we get really busy because Dracula's preying upon Lucy, and then here in September in Whitby, and then he's preying upon Lucy in Whitby, and then in London. And then I love how it kind of, and it's still busy through September, where we are right now we're in the novel, we're in October. And look at October here, October 1. This is where we are, October 1 and 2, Count's house here, they're investigating. And then for the end of this novel, look, it's like hardly anything. Like there's like them investigating and like nothing. We get a lot of details in the novel, what's going on. He doesn't need to keep track of it anymore in his calendar. And I wonder if it is because at this point, the sparsity of notes in the plot, we do get a couple late. We get a September 20, we get a chapter 26 and 27 outline, but a lot of his notes, he's not even bothering to write about them anymore. And number one, he doesn't need a lot of notes in this calendar because they're all together right now, right? All the investigators, the whole Scooby-Doo team, they're all Mystery Incorporated team. They're all together and they're working at the same time. So I don't have to worry about keeping things straight. But I also wonder if it's at this stage of the writing of the novel just takes over, and that he needs to take fewer stops at organizing, that he's just busy writing and I don't need to worry about notes anymore. And for me, it seems as if there were scenes, the letters, which these characters were cut from the novel, but maybe even Jonathan follows up with Trollope and Pickford in his investigation. And so, but he doesn't need those scenes anymore. So they're all cut. Either he didn't write them or decided he doesn't need to cut them. So that whole long letter that he does is he can cut, and he can just do this far more succinct letter from Mitchell, Cady and Sons. Is that what it is? Mitchell, Cady and Sons, that he doesn't need to go into all these details, and I can have a much shorter letter from them. So, so that's a lot to say, that he's spending far more time writing about this book and developing things for the plot that he doesn't need anymore. So that's my little trip into the notes today. All brought on by this little letter from Mitchell, Sons, and Candy about how they acquired things from Count Deville. So let's blow through this last diary entry here from Seward, in which the morning man reported that Renfield is a little restless, saying his prayers loudly. We know this from Mina's entry in the last chapter, that she heard this loud praying. We had this whole discussion last time, and on Monday Drac Chat, you guys mentioned about praying and braying. Apparently, there was a typo in the Oxford World Classics edition that said Renfield was braying, and it should be praying. But there were all these other reprints that Barnes and Noble picked up that they picked up. They use the Oxford text, so they always write braying, but it's praying. He's praying at night. He's saying his prayers loudly, as we learned from Seward here. And then he just he denied sleep and admitted to this is the Watchman. This I find fascinating, right? Because there was the Watchman says there was something about I asked him if that was all. He replied that it was all he heard. This is the Watchman. There was something about his manner so suspicious that I asked him point blank if he had been asleep. And the Watchman, he denied sleep, but admitted to having dozed for a while. It is too bad that men can't be trusted unless they are watched. But this night, night watchman here, or intern, or whatever he is, watching Renfield. Are we to suspect that he dozed as a result of Dracula's influence? Because Dracula has to get to Renfield now, right? Did he put this night watchman asleep at this point? Do you guys think that?
I think so. I think that's what we're supposed to infer.
Yeah.
And I think it's supposed to add to that fear element that something, a night watchman falling to sleep, that's a pretty innocuous thing. It probably happens quite often, but we know that should be a sign of danger. And I think it's kind of, I know we've mentioned this before, like the subtlety of the terror in this novel. Is it Dracula? Is it not Dracula? Did he fall asleep? Did he not, was he glamoured? Like, it's kind of, it just adds to that fear that this is an entity that we know enough about to know some things that he can do, but not enough about to perhaps predict. And I think that builds the suspense and the fear about what will happen next really, really well.
Yeah, because this is a big note. What's going on that Seward doesn't realize is going on right now is pretty significant. That we learn in the next chapter. But right away, but Seward goes back into like, we're making plans. Godalming thinks as well to have horses in readiness. We have to sterilize all the earth between sunrise and sunset. So we get a plan here. Like, this is the plan we have to combat the Count right now. And I love that Van Helsing is off to the British Museum, looking up some authorities on ancient medicine, to searching for witch and demon cures, which may be useful to us later. And I can't help but think that that's like him off to the British Museum to research. That's what Stoker was doing so often, especially in the early writing of this novel. He was going to the British Museum, to the library, to research for this novel. And this is another sign that I think Stoker sees himself as Van Helsing. Like, that's what he would do. He'd be the Van Helsing guy off into the British Museum doing the research. And later, I wonder if Renfield's quiet. Has anything? Renfield's quiet. His moods have so followed the doings of the Count that the coming destruction of the monster may be carried to him in some subtle way. So Seward's recognizing that Renfield is some, way we can. He's like the Count's radio in a sense, that we can figure out where he is and what he's doing. And if only we could, figure this out. But then he's not quiet. That wild yell seemed to come from his room. The attendant came bursting in and told me that Renfield had somehow met with some accident. He had heard him yell, and when he went to him, found him lying on his face on the floor, all covered with blood. I must go at once. And this definitely, works towards the, Dracula has some control over these guys, because if he heard the yell, and there has to be a period where Dracula attacks Renfield and then leaves, and then he arrives. So maybe he was, off in some trance again before he could get to him. But it's a cliffhanger ending. It's, bum bum bum, big yell. Renfield is, hurt in some way, and we won't find out till next chapter. So. You guys have anything to add before, as we end this chapter? Anything we didn't touch upon?
No, but just what a great ending. And the next chapter is so good. I was saying to Lauren, it's my favorite chapter, and it's so exciting, and Stoker sets it up so well with this ending, and then also all of the chapters where the men are just useless. Something bad's going to happen. So.
You should have told me sooner. If I noticed, we could have had a switch. You could have done the next chapter. No. Would have been fine.
This was a great chapter, though. This was really interesting.
We messaged about it earlier just to kind of compare notes, and we were kind of like, what's our quick takeaway from this chapter? And I was like, the men are crap again. That was kind of the general overview. We were like, yeah. This is kind of, like Mary said, like her note was hubris, and my note was just men.
Well, how about Renfield though? Because you can't lump Renfield in with these men, right? And
no.
Renfield is.
But Renfield's other, if we're talking about it from a Gothic perspective, in the same way that the Count is other and Lucy is other, Renfield is also other. And an other that doesn't really have a space. I noticed someone mentioned something about the way the novel uses ableist tropes and disability, and that is certainly something that is massively happening in this novel, and that is picking up from things like Dr. Caligari and the Isle of Dr. Moreau and all that kind of scientific Gothic of the mid-19th century. The asylum itself is a symbol for the fact that the other cannot exist within society. Renfield is unwell, but there is no treatment for Renfield. There is no he's kind of there to be studied more than he is to be treated. He's there as a learning experience for the Doctor rather than as a patient. So it kind of brings a lot of, it is a very ableist novel, as many novels are, particularly from the 19th century, but certainly the Renfield character, I think, brings you back around quite constantly to the instability of the other in society, which is what Dracula is about to experience. And you know, going back to what we said earlier about his treatment of the servants, you know, there's lots of these little moments of, you know, you must, on the one hand it's like, yes, modernity is coming and isn't it great, modernity is moving forwards, but then there's this, you know, people like Renfield getting lost by the wayside, or someone like Lucy who is, you know, before her time, and even Mina to a certain extent, which I think you get perhaps more later in the novel, but certainly here with Renfield it's really evident.
Alrighty, we're on to the next chapter, which is going to be really super exciting. Dracuphiles, thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website. Perhaps that's how you're watching, so thanks for watching. We have a Sundays with Dracula Facebook group where we continue the conversation. Sometimes Lauren posts the Ghoul Guides doings. Thank you for posting those on there. So look us up on Facebook, join in that conversation. I'm always available to answer questions via email. It's epettit, E-P-E-T-T-I-T @rosenbach.org. Next week's co-host joining me will be author, publisher, creator of Dracula, The Evidence, Josh O'Neill. And I can't believe Kim O'Neill's, I'm sorry, I can't believe Kim Newman is going to be on my show next week. That is like crazy town exciting for me. Author of Anno Dracula is going to be like, I'm emailing him back and forth and I'm like, this is great. So I love that. Don't forget to join me tomorrow night for Monday Drac Chat with Dracuphile Holly Graves. And remember to register for Monday Drac Chat ahead of time. Members in Dracula Club only. You can only watch it on Zoom as it airs at 6:30 p.m. EDT. No posts after the airing. A little too late for our British viewers for that. And French, Adrian, who's in France watching the show, and other people around the world. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out our other virtual offerings. If you register for the Mark Gatiss program on Dracula, I would be more grateful than the estate agent when Count Deville drops by. It's like easy money. This guy's just going to pay us big time for houses. Mary and Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And if you have any questions for us, in addition to the YouTube channel, you can find us on Twitter at the Ghoul Guides, for all of your ghoul guiding or guiding of ghouls, whichever way around you would like to take it.
We all need guiding with ghouls.
If you do check out the Essex, but is it Gothic video, I put in loads of pictures from my recent trip down to Essex. So of Purfleet. So I think there's a clipping that shows what would have been Ordnance House, which would have been Seward's Mental Asylum, which I tweeted out today, but it's in the video as well. And then loads of pretty pictures of the church. Carfax House isn't there anymore, but there is a nice church, St. Stephen's, and then just the beautiful Thames. So if anyone wants to see pictures of Purfleet, because it's definitely not London, then check out that video.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone, join us next week on Sundays with Dracula for chapter 21, when we'll find out why Renfield was yelling and Dracula himself, Count Deville, will make an appearance. It is a chilling scene when this all happens. So I'm looking forward to that. Once again, will be played out by Tucker Christine's pleated gazelle song, Storm into Whitby. Farewell, everyone. And in the words of our friend Dracula, go safely and leave something of the happiness you bring. Farewell, everyone.